Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. We always take the game very seriously and talking about the most competitive decks, the most competitive cards, but have you ever wondered what are the worst cards in Star Wars Unlimited? So this is obviously something that's not meant to be taken super seriously. We're going to try to find out together in the most scientific way possible what are the worst cards in the game. So obviously we now have 3 sets, which gives us a good array of different cards that we can talk about. But the first question we need to take out of the way first is, how do you determine what is the worst card? So for me, there's 4 criteria that I decided to take into account. The first one is the ceiling. The power ceiling of the card is how powerful this card is at its best. So even though the card is bad and probably not worth running, we're going to ask ourselves the question, how powerful this card can be if you are in the right scenario. Because there's always this guy, you say, oh, this card is bad, and there's always this guy coming out and say, oh yeah, but what if this, this, and this, and that, and this, and then says, oh yeah, then that can be good, right? And obviously that can be good. There's certain cards that, even though they are pretty bad, can take you by surprise and kind of do something that you were not expecting. And in a given situation can be powerful. There's no such thing as bad cards. There's always the right situation for the right card. And even the worst card in the game, there's a scenario in which the card can actually be good. So this is the ceiling. Obviously, the other thing that we're going to evaluate is the floor, is how powerful this card is at its worst. Sometimes there are cards that are simply not very good, because they're simply just better things that happen. But, for example, a unit is still a unit. Like, a unit cannot be the worst card in Star Wars Unlimited. Like, it's unless it does something detrimental to you, a unit is kind of like, yeah, the worst case scenario, it's a unit, right? It attacks, it does things. So, yeah, some cards are very, very low ceiling, but they can also have a relatively high floor in the sense that even at their worst, they still do something. While there's tons of cards in Star Wars Limited that simply don't do anything in a lot of situations. The other thing we're going to evaluate is how powerful the card is in Limited, whether in Draft, Sealed, because obviously none of the cards that we're going to talk about today are playable in a competitive constructed setting. But how powerful is the card whenever you want to put this in a limited deck, whether it's a sealed deck or even possibly in the Twin Suns deck? Like, how powerful can this card be in that context? And obviously that's the other question we're going to ask. And obviously the last question is more related to constructed, and this time we're going to talk about the potential. Obviously none of those cards are good in the context of constructed, but maybe in the future this card can see play. Because obviously some cards are missing synergy. There could be a synergy, there's combo. So in this categories we're kind of like rating how likely is the card going to see play in the future. How likely is there going to be specific combos or specific synergy or specific meta that can turn this terrible card into a good card? And we've seen this plenty of time in the history of, notably the history of Magic the Gathering, cards that were considered completely unplayable and then suddenly out of nowhere became very, very powerful because of a specific interaction. So we're also going to evaluate how likely is that those cards can see play in the future. We do an average of those 4 ratings, which will give us a final rating, and then the final rating will basically rank the card depending on that rating. So I decided to, first of all, obviously we're not going to be rating every single card in the game. I decided to make a selection of like 10 cards, which I think are very bad, and decided to kind of apply the ratings that we talked about here to those cards, and then from there we'll decide which one is the worst card of Star Wars Limited. If there's other card that you would have included into that competition, let me know. The first card I want to talk about is Rallying Cry. We're going to start from this card from Spark of Rebellion, and then we go to Shadow of the Galaxy, and then we go to Twilight of the Republic. And Rallying Cry is a pretty a good example of a pretty bad card. And I'll explain why later on. So first of all, we'll talk about the ceiling. The ceiling of this card is actually relatively high, because obviously if you get loads of units into play, and you give all those units rage 2, and then you get the chance to attack with them, this is representing possibly can win you the game, and can represent a lot of damage and possibly win you the game. So the ceiling of the card is relatively high. This is probably where this card is going to make most of its points. The floor of this card is very low though. I mean, granted, you can Rallying Cry only one unit. The card is relatively cheap if you're playing a double red deck. But still, obviously the floor is that the card, you need to have units into play to be able to play that card. And you need to also be playing a double red deck, because if you have to pay 5 for it, it's very expensive. And those units to be ready. So the floor of this card is very, very, very low, because there's going to be just simply a lot of situation where you can simply just can't play the card. So that's like really, really bad. If we talk about draft, once again, this card is going to have a very bad rating. I guess in draft you can play this card out of aspect in some very swarmy decks. But once again, you need to be in a very particular situation. Also, when we talk about the draft card, we need to take into context the set in which this card is. And obviously, set 1 does not favor swarm strategy as much as set 3, for example. So Rallying Cry would have been rated higher if it was in the context of a set 3 pool rather than in a set 1 pool, because now whenever you're playing this card in draft, you don't have the same swarm strategy that makes this card good. And even so, you will have to pay 5 for it most likely in draft, and it remains extremely situational. Just simply not a very good card. And then potential for the future, I give this a 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10. Once again, if ever we see some sort of double red swarm strategy, you can see Rallying Cry possibly seeing play, maybe as a one-off, maybe as a thing that you can kind of like in particular situations. But so yeah. So why is this card so bad? Well, very simple, because it's very situational. It's very easy to counter. Because obviously you play the card and your opponent can simply just kill the unit that you buffed. A card, for example, like Attack Pattern Delta is much stronger, because not only does it deal more damage, but it also gives a health bonus to your unit, meaning that your units are more likely to be able to actually attack and benefit from their attack bonus. And the attack bonus that you give them actually matters whenever your opponent is trying to attack your units. They will actually take the damage back. So this Rallying Cry is like a bad version of Pattern Attack Delta, which is already not a great card in my opinion. So it's pretty terrible. But it's not the bottom of the barrel. There's definitely worse in the game. So total rating is 2.5 out of 10 for this card. Now we'll talk about Tactical Advantage. So Tactical Advantage, another other card, it's been reprinted in the starter set of set 3, but it was obviously originally printed for set 1. And this is one of the worst cards in the game, because attack bonus that don't allow you to attack at the same time. So usually whenever you attack bonus, you want to benefit from the attack bonus right away, because otherwise what happens, you give the attack bonus to your units, and then your opponent just kills the unit, and then you've basically wasted that advantage. Another thing with this card is like the health bonus with Tactical Advantage is really not that significant at all, because what happens is that your opponent can still suicide into you. Yes, your guy is not going to die right away, but he will die at the end of the turn, because these health bonus will expire at the end of the turn. This card has no element of surprise. It has very low impact in the game. It is very situational, and it's not very impactful. So that's why it's a bad card. Now let's talk about the ceiling. The ceiling for this card is 4 out of 10. There is a situation where a +2/+2 can be good, obviously. Maybe it can allow you to survive a certain amount of removal, so you can attack after. The +2 might be the +2 you needed to seal the deal. Auto-attacking it. Not as high as the card we talked about before, Rallying Cry, but definitely there is a situation where this card can be quite good. I would also argue that the floor for this card is higher than for the Rallying Cry, because it's much easier to use. You don't need to have a bunch of units into play to really make full advantage of this card. It's also mono green, so it's much easier to fit in a deck. So yeah, even though ceiling is lower than Rallying Cry, the floor is higher as well. It's easier to use, even though it still remains quite situational. It's still easier to use. In draft, it's a 1 out of 10 again. It's really what we call like a filler, in a sense, like a card that you might play in a deck just to fill out the curve. And in draft, having situational cards sometimes can be forgiven, but honestly, there's just simply so many cards I would rather play over this. I would really rarely play a tactical advantage in my draft pool. And potential for the future, in my opinion, is a 0 out of 10. At least Rallying Cry, you can argue that there are certain type of decks that might want to play a card like this. I don't see any deck ever in the history of the game that would ever want to run tactical advantage in the future. Especially as there's more and more competition coming in. I do not imagine a scenario where tactical advantage would ever see play in Constructed. So for me, the potential is 0 out of 10. I could be wrong about this, obviously. I don't have a crystal ball that tells me what's going to happen, but definitely I really have a hard time imagining this card ever seen play in Constructed. The final rating is a 2 out of 10, so lower rating than Rallying Cry, because Rallying Cry is a bit more specialized. I think a bad card that sees a little bit more, I would say a bad card that is genuinely bad but not awful, is actually gonna have a lower rating in my mind. That's something that is terrible but has some sort of potential for the future. Moving on now with Enforced Loyalty. This time we're moving on to Shadow of the Galaxy. Believe it or not, Spark of Rebellion has very few bad cards. Even certain cards like that a lot of people were kind of talking down on, like Restock when it first was spoiled, or cards like Smoke and Cinder even saw a little bit of competitive play. It's like Restock, of course, is a good example of a card that definitely saw a lot of play. So there's actually very few terrible cards in Spark of Rebellion, which is another testament on how well this set was designed. Next we got Enforced Loyalty. Enforced Loyalty is pretty terrible because, first of all, paying 2 for drawing 2 cards, that's, in Star Wars Limited, it's not insane. It's pretty good, but it's not like insane. Drawing cards, generally speaking, in Star Wars Limited is not super valuable because you are playing a game where you're drawing 2 cards per turn. Therefore, you don't depend on card draw as much as in other games in order to refill your hand. Obviously, the fact that you have to defeat a friendly unit is a massive cost. Obviously, there are certain decks, certain units that do benefit from being defeated and get something when they get defeated. But those cards are relatively rare, and even if you do, they are just better things to do when you defeat them. A good example for this is obviously Palpatine. If you're running a deck that has a lot of units that are getting you a bonus for being killed, most unlikely you're already playing Palpatine, and Palpatine, of course, there's no reason to play Enforced Loyalty if you have Palpatine, because Palpatine can basically do the same thing. Here you're spending 1 cost to get 2 cards. Palpatine will just spend 0 card to get you 1 card, which is same in terms of card advantage, and obviously it's going to cost 1 instead of costing 2, and it also will deal 1 damage. So the fact that Palpatine's ability, by the way, is considered to be quite situational, even though it can be strong in certain decks, it still remains quite situational. So if you think that Palpatine's ability is kind of not great, imagine a card that costs twice the price, doesn't deal damage, and require you to draw the card for it to work. Simply an awful card. Last but not least, it also has a double command aspect requirement, which make the card particularly difficult to run into your deck, because now you have to specifically play a deck that has double aspect. So this card is just unplayable on so many ways. So power ceiling of the card, 3 out of 10. I guess if you're playing a deck that plays a lot, if you're playing the right deck for it, the card can be okay. But obviously, the sacrifice that you have to make in order to do that is bearable, and you will probably be better off just running Palpatine. The floor is 0 out of 10 because obviously you might not even have a friendly unit that you want to defeat for this to work. There's been plenty of situations where defeating your own unit is horrible. So floor, I give this a 0 out of 10. In terms of draft, this card is obviously unplayable in draft. Especially in the context of Shadow of the Galaxy, where, at least, as I said, if this card would have been printed in set 3, there would have been maybe a little bit more ways you could have run the card, because there's loads of like small tokens you can easily sacrifice, even though most likely you prefer to run the 2 mana draw 2 if you have a token in play, which is just so much better. But at least there would be like a little bit more cases for it. In the context of Shadow of the Galaxy, there's simply just nothing that really synergizes with this kind of like defending your own unit shenanigans. And potential, I give this a 2 out of 10. As I said, maybe like some sort of combo decks that really want to draw a million cards. Where like, yeah, it's hard. Maybe the 2 out of 10 is a little bit generous on this one. Maybe it should be lower, but it's a kind of effect that does not exist in other card. And whenever a card does something relatively unique, it deserves to have a bit of a higher ranking of potentials. Even though in this case, as I said, because if you're not running Palpatine, there's literally no other card in the game that can do that. So maybe that's where I give it a little bit more. But honestly, the 2 out of 10 here is very generous. So rating of this card, a 1.25 out of 10. This is really, really a bad card. Moving on, I decided to select Headhunting. So Headhunting is an interesting card. It does something unique as it allows you to attack with 3 units at once, which is, there's no other card in the game that allows you to attack with 3 units at once, and those units don't have to be bounty hunters. What really kills the card and makes the card from being potentially a very powerful card to an absolutely useless card is the fact that you cannot attack base with this, which means that you need to attack with 3 units, and it needs to be enough units on the other side for you to attack into. And here the benefit becomes like a million times more situational. Obviously, also they have to benefit from the +2 attack bonus, they have to be bounty hunters, which there's just, even in Shadow of the Galaxy, there's just not that many bounty hunters. It's not like as popular as a trait as Underworld, so you really need to kind of have a very specific deck for this to work. And even if you do work, the ability that you would have ready, like 3 ready units that you can attack with, are just extremely unlikely. Most likely you're going to be using Hunting with 1 unit, or even like with 1 or 2 units. On 1 unit, it just gives a +2 attack bonus, allow you to attack with it. But once again, since it can only attack, it costs 2 for a +2 bonus attack. It's just so incredibly situational. Like, it's going to be a bad buff spell for bounty hunters 90% of the time. It's just incredibly situational. So the ceiling for this card is a 3 out of 10. Obviously, there might be a scenario where there's a large unit you want to attack, you have multiple units and you can kill this unit in one go, but here's the sacrifice for doing so is huge. You probably have to sack your entire board for this to happen. So even in the best case scenario, it's not particularly amazing. I'll give this a 1 out of 10 on the floor, because at least, as I said, if you have 1 bounty hunter into play, you can use this as a bad buff spell, which is not completely horrible, but yeah, no, it's really bad even on the floor. In draft, it's a 0 out of 10. I would never want to run a card like this in my deck, unless, once again, we need to have like such a crazy amount of bounty hunters in my deck, and have this as like, I really have nothing else to play, I'll just run this and see how it goes. But yeah, it's just incredibly bad. Potential for the future, I think, is 0 out of 10. I don't think we're necessarily going to have I just don't see a scenario in which this card would ever be good. I just don't see ever a scenario or where this card would ever be good and constructed. And 10, in total here we get a 1 out of 10. That's obviously a very bad card. Next we got Improperty Among Thieves. So I actually was pretty excited about this card when it was first released, because I thought that if you didn't have a unit, you could basically just play this as sort of a change of heart for 4, which is pretty nice. Even then, it would not have been amazing, because it's still conditional. You need to have no unit in play, and it has a double cunning requirement, which really limits how much you can play the card. But I would say at least it would have had a couple of uses. Obviously, this card is not meant to be for constructed constructed playable. It's more supposed to be kind of a fun, chaotic card for Twin Suns, and I understand this, but we're still going to rate it and talk about it as if we wanted to play this in constructed. So obviously the problem with the card is very situational, because you need to give your opponent you need to get a unit on your side for this to work. It only works if you also need both units needs to be ready, so you can't just give out like a non-ready unit to your opponent and then get a ready card from the opponent. The unit has to be ready no matter what. So that's another very big limitation that makes this card incredibly situational. And of course the double yellow aspect requirements makes the card pretty much unplayable. Power ceiling for the card, 3 out of 10 I guess. Sometimes it can be a change of heart for cheaper. So if you're running, I was gonna say if you're running Palpatine, but you can't even run Palpatine with this because of the double cunning aspect requirement. But yeah, it's I guess there's some cases where it can be very close to a full resource, but the fact that you have to give a unit is just a big deal as well. Floor is 0 because there's going to be a lot of situations when you won't be able to play that card at all. Draft, I give this a 1 out of 10 because I think in the context of Twilight of the Republic, there's just simply just a lot of tokens you can give away and get back. But and paying the aspect penalty in draft is not as terrible than in draft. So maybe it's not completely unplayable in draft for that reason, but it's still very bad, obviously. And then potential for the future, 3 out of 10. Okay, so this may be a little bit surprising to some people that I'm giving such a high rating for potential. And the reason why I'm giving this card a 3 out of 10 in potential is because in Magic, there actually are cards that have very negative effects. That you might, and there's an entire strategy, notably in that sees plays in Legacy and also in Commander, where you actually want to give your opponent units. So the idea here would be to kind of give away that units to the opponent. You're playing a unit that has some really strong upside, but once they're into play, like they have a very, very bad downside. And then you want to give that card to the opponent to basically damage them. So some sort of combo involving that could potentially be very strong. The problem is it's only giving the units for only 1 turn, so that's as its limitation. And the other limitation is once again double cunning aspect requirement, which means that the odds that this combo is going to be in double cunnings are going to be relatively low. So, but I still think this is a kind of a unique effect, and it's the only card in the game that allows you to give a unit to the opponent. You also can do this with Shoes Side, which does it permanently, but this one does it for a much lower price. Even with aspect penalty, it does it for 6 instead of 7, so I don't know. The final ranking, 1.75 out of 10 for improperty among thieves. So, another card for Twilight of the Republic, Wartime Profiteering. So this card allows you to look at the top 4 deck equal the numbers of units that were defeated this phase, and then you draw one of those cards and put the other at the bottom of the deck in a random order. So the problem with this card is like it's quite situational because you need to actually have at least, like, to make this interesting, to have at least like 3 or 4 units that have died to get like a significant selection out of it. You have to pay a resource for it, and once you've done all this, you only get to draw 1 card at the end of the day. So the effect is just not that amazing. Yeah, it's just simply just very, very, very low impact, and there's going to be situation that you simply just can't play the card because none unit has been has died. So the fact that it's conditional and that it is very low impact when it actually meets the condition, those two things combined makes the card incredibly bad. So as far as the ceiling, I'm going to give this a 1 out of 10 because even in the ideal scenario, let's say like a 5 units died, it's still not amazing. It's still not great. As far as the floor, I'm giving this a 2 out of 10. The reason why I'm giving a floor a 2 out of 10 is because it's relatively easy to have 1 unit that died during a turn. So I would say that if you're playing this in draft, you can just like pay 1, draw 1. It's not great, and you don't want to do this most of the time because you're losing resources just to replace a card. But I would say that if you want to get higher chances to get like into your bombs or whatever, this could be like okay-ish. But even then, it's not amazing. In draft, I give this a 0 out of 10. Maybe it's worth a 1 out of 10 for the scenario I just explained. But yeah, I don't see how you would ever want to put this into your deck, to be fair. And potential for the future, 0 out of 10. I don't see any way this card would be ever playable. Even like, I'm trying to think about like crazy combos which you would be able to do. Like, I don't know. Like, I just don't see how you could possibly make this good, even in a specific, very weird combo. So potential, total, I give this card a 0.75 out of 10. For me, it's the worst card that we've seen so far. Then we got the infamous Jar Jar Binks, which is the only unit on this list. So the reason why I usually didn't put any other units in this list is because most units, yes, okay, they might be understats, yes, they might be overpriced, but at least they're units. When you play them, they actually do something of value. And the problem with Jar Jar Binks is like, that's not even necessarily the case. Obviously, 2-3 for 2 is a bad stat line right off the start. The fact that it costs double cunning requirement makes the card effectively very hard to play in draft, because most of the case you're gonna have to pay 4 for it. And then obviously the on attack effect is actually can hit your own base, can heal your own units. It could also be Jar Jar Binks itself. So it's very, very completely random. Obviously random effects that are very, like, there can be random effects that can be good in competitive, but that's because most often than not is because there's a way to control that randomness in a way that it benefits you. In Jar Jar Binks, there's literally zero control, which is the entire point of this card. It's obviously not meant to be a card that is competitively playable. It's supposed to be a meme card, a card that people play just for fun. And I understand this, but once again, we don't take this very seriously. We're just trying to kind of like have fun and trying to figure out what is the worst card in the game is. And I think Jar Jar Binks has a very good shot at it, because once again, it can be such detrimental for you because you have zero control over when this damage is going. So if I had to rate the power ceiling of this card, I actually give it a pretty good rate, 5 out of 10, because if you're very lucky, Jar Jar Binks is actually very strong, because he attacks, deals damage to a random unit. If it hits the opponent unit or the opponent base, it's actually pretty decent value. It's not amazing, but it's decent value, I would say. So ceiling, 5 out of 10. Where I'm really gonna downgrade the card is on the floor. Here I couldn't even put it 0, because 0 to 10 means that basically the card cannot even be played. Here on the floor, Jar Jar Binks can actually just damage your own base, kill himself, kill another unit you have into play. Like, there's just so many ways this card can screw you over. So I had to do it a -5. So then if you put it the 5 and a -5, you actually have a 0 rating on the power ceiling and floor. In draft, it's obviously unplayable. I actually think that Jar Jar Binks could be kind of playable if it was just single aspect cunning in draft, but with a double aspect requirement, absolutely unplayable in draft. Potential, I give it a 1 out of 10. And this 1 out of 10 is simply because if there's some sort of way, like if they print any card that allow to basically turn something that is random, like let's say a card that says, if you have a random effect, instead you get to choose the target for it, like something along those lines, something that allows you to control any effect in the game that normally would be random. I don't know, a leader that would allow you to do that would have this on his leader side, then Jar Jar Binks would obviously become quite strong. But once again, the odds of this ever being the case is just so incredibly low that I cannot possibly give Jar Jar Binks a better rating than 1 out of 10, which gives it a final rating of 0.25 out of 10, which is the lowest rating we've given so far, I think. Next, we got the Grim Resolved. Some people were actually excited about this card when it was revealed, and I cannot understand why. This card is so bad, because it's so incredibly situational. you are paying 2 for an effect like this, which in my opinion is very overpriced. Cannot target leaders, which is a pretty big deal because generally speaking, when a unit has tons of damage on it, it usually is a leader. And then it gives it grit, which obviously doesn't do anything if the unit is not damaged. And it only gives grit for the attack. It not even gives, at least if it was giving like grit until the end of the phase, that would be like better. But here it's like only this gives grit for the attack. It's very, very situational. Because you need to have a unit with a bunch of damage on it to actually work. And even in that situation, it still is quite expensive in my opinion. Why would you ever pay 2 for an effect like this when you can play Surprise Strike that gives a +3 attack for 2, but it's +3 attack guaranteed? While Grit, it's very rarely going to be that much damage anyway. It's just so incredible. So power ceiling for this card is 5 out of 10, I guess, because obviously if you have a unit with like 8 damage on it or whatever, then the card is obviously insane. And there's some combos that you can do with this card. We saw, for example, the card No Disintegration. I think you can No Disintegration on your own unit, and then you can go Grim Resolve to, but that's just so incredibly unrealistic that this is ever going to work, because your opponent can just simply just kill your unit. And it still costs 5 resources, and it still requires you to spend 2 action on it. But anyway, 5 out of 10 for the power ceiling, just for that. Floor, 0 out of 10, obviously, because there's going to be plenty of situations where you can't play the card. Draft, 1 out of 10. If you have like a grit build or a build where you can deal damage to your own units, then this card can be a filler. So it's basically what I like to call situational filler, meaning that it's going to be quite situational to play it. But if you actually play it, even if they're in the right situation, it's still going to be like a filler. Next, we got the potential. I give this a 2 out of 10 because obviously the combo potential with other cards that could make this card being like an OTK kind of effect. Obviously, I don't necessarily think that's going to be very good, but at least it has the potential to do something along those lines. And for a total, I give this a 2 out of 10 for Grim Resolve. Next, we got Consolidations of Power. Consolidation of Power. And I've tried very, very hard to think about a way to make this card work. And for the life of me, I could not find any. So if you guys know why is going on with this card and what did FFG try to do with this card, just let me know. This card is just so incredibly bad. It's insanely expensive. It requires you to defeat your own units in order to be able to play a unit for free, but you're not really playing that unit for free because you spend 6 resources on Consolidations of Power, and you've also spent 6 resources for the card itself, and you also sacrificed a bunch of units. So it's very hard to imagine a scenario. So obviously the idea of the card is like you want to sacrifice units that have very high attack, like something like the best case scenario would be something like a Greedo, which has 3 attacks for 1, or the jetpack droid thing, the B12 jetpack, which is like a 5/2 for 3. But even then, you're basically sacrificing a 3-drop to be able to play a 5-drop into play, but you also had to spend 6 resources to make it happen. It's just absurd, the amount of the amount of loops and things that you have to do to make this any good. If you think that like card like Galactic Ambition is bad, this Galactic Ambition is amazing compared to this, because Galactic Ambition, you have to deal damage to your base to be able to play the card. This one, you have to sacrifice units, and not just like small units. You have to sacrifice units with relatively high attack value. So it's like, obviously dealing damage to your base is a far smaller cost than having to sacrifice your entire board. So this card is so, and at least like, yeah, this card is so incredibly bad. I can't even wrap my head around it. So let's talk about also the fact that it's command and villainy, mean that it's going to even limit even more the amount of context in which you're going to be able to play that card. So in terms of power ceiling, this card, I give this a 0 out of 10. Even at its best, I don't see this card having any significant impact on the game. I'm sorry. I just can't imagine a situation where it would actually be beneficial for you to play that. Next, we got the flooring. Obviously, 0 out of 10. There's going to be loads of situations where you don't gain any advantage playing this card, obviously. There's going to be a situation where you simply won't have any unit into play to sacrifice, and even if you do, the impact is going to be extremely low. In terms of draft, it's obviously unplayable in draft. And in terms of potential, I also give this a 0 out of 10 because, as I said, I really tortured myself, really tried really hard thinking a situation where this could potentially be playable. And even then, I just couldn't find it. Or if there is a chance for this card to ever be good, it's going to be so incredibly unlikely that I can't even give like 1 point for this. So final rating for Consolidation of Power, 0 out of 10, and a massive candidate, so being the worst card ever printed for Star Wars Unlimited. And because Twilight of the Republic is a set that keeps on giving on the bad cards, I had to include Corner the Prey. This card, for one, allows you to attack with a unit, and then you get +1 attack. It's a little bit similar to Grim Resolve, but instead of the amount of damage on your own unit, what matters here is on the unit that you attack. So you don't even... So once again, there's the combo with you can play like Nodes Integration, deal like a bunch of damage, and then play Corner the Prey. But then, why do you even do this if the unit has low health? What do you even need to get a +1 attack bonus? And obviously, you need to attack. You need to be attacking a unit, right? I'm just trying to realize here. Yeah, you can actually... This only works if you're attacking a unit. You can't just attack a base with this, right? I'm just trying to make sure here. This is why I had a pause here, is because like, wait a second. Can you actually attack a base with this? Okay, I need to double check that. If you guys know the answer in the comments, let me know. I just have a moment that we're just going to assume you cannot attack a base with this, because if you can attack a base with it, this card is insane, and I don't think... Because attack with a unit doesn't say attacking a unit, say on the defender. For each damage on the defender, this defender could be... Maybe a base cannot be a defender, that's why. But in any case, we're just going to assume you cannot attack a base with it. So obviously, the idea is like you would want to play this on a unit that has Overwhelm in order to get benefit from the attack. So it's very incredibly situational because you need to be targeting a unit that has Overwhelm. You need to be targeting a unit that has a lot of damage on it in order to really benefit from this. So it's just insanely situational. So Power Ceiling, I give it a 3 out of 10 because obviously you play this on like a mall that has Overwhelm and you attack a small unit or a unit that has a lot of damage on it, and you can just deal an insane amount of damage to base. So that can be powerful, but it's insanely situational, but that can happen. Oh, by the way, it does not combine with... It combines if Maul is into play, right? But it doesn't work with the Leader's ability of Maul. Because Leader's ability of Maul obviously makes you attack with a unit. So you wouldn't be able to combine this with the Leader's ability of Maul if he's not deployed. Floor, 0 out of 10. Of course, there's many situations where this card won't do anything. Draft, a 1 out of 10. Once again, if you're playing Maul as your leader, this could be, once again, it's one of those situational filler card. It's if you're playing Maul as your leader and you actually have no other card to put into your deck, you can just put this in your, to fill up the slots, I guess. Potential, 1 out of 10. Yeah. There might be some sort of combination that could be, I don't know, very good with this. I don't know. But it would be a combo card for sure. But yeah, cannot imagine this seeing any play. I give the 1 out of 10 just for the 1% chance. And final ranking, I give this a 1.25 out of 10. And that's it. We got our final ranking. Now that we rated all those cards, I'm gonna give you my final ranking on this. Here we go. The final ranking is Wartime Profiteering. I think his score was 0.75 out of 10. Jar Jar Binks with a score of 0.25 out of 10, and the champions of the worst card in Star Wars Unlimited is Consolidation of Power with 0 out of 10. Yeah, this card is truly the worst card of the deck. And you could argue, like, Jar Jar Binks was obviously made to be bad. Like, he's kind of a meme card. But as far as, like, Consolidation of Power, clearly the designers had something in mind. Clearly the design, it's a rare as well. It's a rare, guys. So obviously, like, wartime profiteering at least can be playable in draft. If you really have nothing else to play, you can just fill and just mix it. So yeah, the one card, draw a card, like literally this. But Consolidation of Power is basically, it's supposed to be good because it's a rare, right? It's a rare. Yes, I think the designers had something in mind. They were probably thinking, oh, this could be good. I think what probably happened with this card is like they were probably like a actually good version of that card before, and maybe the designers were afraid that it would be too good and they nerfed it last minute and didn't playtest it after that, and that made the card completely, and didn't realize the card was completely unplayable. So I think it's probably something that happens along those lines. As you can see, of course, all 3 cards on the podiums are Twilight of the Republic card, which confirms the fact that Twilight of the Republic is the worst set in the game in terms of like power level. Yeah, I hope you find this fun. If you have other suggestions of cards that you think would have deserved to be on the video or even maybe on the podium, if you think that there's a card that is worse than Consolidations of Power, let me know and we'll talk about it. Thank you so much for following that video. Let me know if you enjoyed that kind of video in the comments, and if you do, like and subscribe. See you next time.